From our studios around the world, this is the Taste of Place podcast. Each month, we share stories from the keepers of culinary culture and heritage to spark ideas for your professional path or your next travel adventure. I'm your host, Erik Wolf. Thanks for listening. Today's guest is Blanca Valencia, a sharp and insightful voice on Spanish culinary culture and the author behind the Gazpacho Chronicles. Blanca brings a thoughtful perspective on the intersection of food, history, and identity, challenging how Spain presents its gastronomy to the world and advocating for deeper recognition of producers, heritage, and tradition. This is a conversation that goes well beyond restaurants and into the soul of Spanish food culture. Welcome to the show today.
Thanks for having me, Erik.
I am really excited to be speaking with you because we had a lovely conversation a couple of weeks ago, and definitely, I think we're kindred spirits. We definitely see things in the same light. And you and I were about to put the world right between Ireland and Spain and everything else in the ecosystem. And I wanted to get you on the show. So here you are.
Thank you.
And when I met you last time, I subscribed to your Substack, the Gazpacho Chronicles, and I love your writing. What you write about is exactly what I care about. And it's so insightful. You really get culinary culture. You really get the importance of cultural preservation, culinary heritage preservation. And I like the way you think. Would you explain to us your inspiration for the Gazpacho Chronicles and how it came to be?
This inspiration, I started working for an importer of Spanish foods and working with so many chefs and shops. I realized there was a very basic understanding of Spanish food culture. I approached Cervantes, the Cultural Institute in Chicago, the Spanish Cultural Institute, about doing these sessions that would highlight Spanish food culture. So I pitched to do an olive oil one, fish tins. This is 16 years ago, cheese, and they were very well received. But what I focused on was all the intersections of food between like Spanish food and art, Spanish food and language, Spanish food and expression. So all these different things, archaeology, and people really love that. It never occurred to me, even though I was told, oh, you should write about this. It just became a workshop. And then I started doing it. I did it for the Chicago Culinary Historians. And then I've done it here. But then I started thinking, I have all these material. I should just write it down. But I love the comedy of Spanish language, which is when you have all these diminutives and augmentatives, how these dishes sound when you analyze that. So anyway, it was triggered really by selling products. I think that really opens your mind to the state of Spanish food is when you're talking to chefs about Spanish cheese and they just know one cheese.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. So what would you say the state of Spanish food is right now?
I think Spain right now is concentrating too much on numbers, on tourism numbers. So they want to reach 100 million. But what we present to the world is very chef-driven, very masculine-driven. There's no real focus on producers. There's no focus on culinary heritage classes. If you go back in time 30 years, you see there were a lot of very enterprising women who thought in a similar way to how I think, which is linking food with art, linking food with producers, with heritage. I think now we're so focused on restaurants and the Michelin guide and the best 50 restaurants of the world that, that's not really helping the people who need it the most, which are the smaller producers. Yeah.
I agree with you 100%. Living in Spain, I see it day in and day out, and it's always about the high-end gourmet restaurants, the Michelin-star chefs and restaurants. And you're right. I don't think I've seen a Spanish woman featured in any marketing or promotions ever since I've been doing this.
Yeah.
It's always a male chef. And also, I would say the geographic concentration is unbalanced. You have a heavy concentration in the Basque Country, in Catalonia, and of course, the big cities like Madrid and Barcelona. But the rest of the country is forgotten. And you don't hear anything about Galicia or Extremadura or Andalusia. You have these stereotypes that persist about what Spanish food is. And then you have one of the world's largest markets, the United States, thinking that burritos are Spanish food. So they mix the language and the culture. And it's shocking, really.
Yeah. I think because Spain is so fragmented into different regions and governments and organizations, we have failed to, our gastronomy, which is very complex, and present it to the world. You know, you go to a France event and it's always best in class, whereas in Spain, we try to be very democratic and have all these different regions. So sometimes what we present is not what people want to see. It's hard, but I do think that Spain has a lot of potential, and I would wish to be more involved in presenting these angles that I also feel are disappearing if we don't protect them, if we don't get tourists to buy those products.
Yeah. A lot of things are disappearing. Experiences, food stores or dishes that tourists just don't get introduced to. And then they die when people die. My Spanish tutor lives in Valencia, and we were talking about gastronomy, and he showed me some images on the screen of some of his favorite dishes, things I've never seen before anywhere. And I said, wow, those look really good. I've not seen them. And he says, you won't, because we make them at home and we don't tend to eat out. He said, if you drove 1 or 2 hours into the interior of the country, you might find some little cafe somewhere that serves something like this, but you'd have to speak to them in their local dialect. And he said, it just wouldn't happen. And tourists are introduced to croquettes and paella everywhere in the country, and sangria and gazpacho and tapas. And that's it, that people don't know anything else from Spain.
Yeah. I think some things happened because restaurants are so promoted and it feels that everybody's on board, whether it's the tourism board or local authorities in promoting restaurants. It's overwhelming. But what's happening to restaurants is there's been a standardization of the menu. And you can see, like, you always get croquetas, you get a type of salmorejo or gazpacho, you get the roasted artichoke in the finer places. The Iberico ham. But when you look at the richness of Spanish legumes, like, where do you get that? And I think chefs have failed to introduce that into very high-end menus. It's considered something that's for the school lunch menu or something like that. And I think that's a pity because we have a richness that is really unparalleled. We're one of the countries that has so many different protected denominations of origins of legumes and so many dishes that people would never eat. There's a lot more that are home cooked dishes. Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah. Spain also has a climate that can grow so much. And I think that there's so little that we actually see in the stores. We see the same standard vegetables and fruits and stuff. How many people know that the only place in Europe where bananas are grown is actually in Spain, in the Gran Canaries, and strange things like that? People just don't know that. But there's other things that Spain could be growing and they don't. For example, parsnips. It's very hard to find parsnips in Spain, but obviously you live in Ireland and you can find them everywhere. And this parsnips we get actually are imported from Ireland. They're €4 for 4 pieces. Or in Ireland, you could get a bag for 50 cents. It blows my mind why things like that aren't more. Why can't we diversify and use the different fruits and vegetables that can easily grow here?
Because I think that a lot of Spanish food culture is also very export driven. But parsnip is an example of it's called chiribia in Spanish, but it's something that you would really never find in the Spanish gastronomic. But we are, I think, starting to cultivate more. There's a lot of Peruvian chilies being grown on the coast in Andalusia. There's a company called La Sarita that do a very good range of Peruvian products grown in Spain, obviously, because we have so many Latin American immigrants. But yeah, I think, anyway, there's a lot to analyze about Spanish food culture, but I do think it's so complex because each region behaves singularly. And we don't tend to work together with other regions. So it's almost, if one region does well, they don't really go and say, oh, let's pull this other region with us. So so if you look at, there's Andalusia do their own exports, the Basque Country, they want to work individually. And this is a result of history, post-dictatorship, but that makes it very difficult.
Do you think that will ever change?
Unfortunately, I think it could change. It could change, but it would be with a very right-wing political party. And that's not what Spain wants either. But when you hear, there was an Instagram comedian the other day doing a video of what would happen to Spain if Vox took power. And he was just like, so basically we'd go back to you just eat and you can have kimchi. But it was funny. It was obviously crazy and exaggerated. But I think in Spain, the moment you talk about centralized power, that's considered bad. And I don't think centralized power, it can be good or it can be bad. But in Spain, people are scared of central governance.
Sure. Given the history, I think I can understand that. Yeah. How is your Substack then a tool to help people get to know the Spanish culinary assets better? Because I think you talk about them, but how can people really connect beyond the words with what you write?
I think I wrote a post about how to visit Spain or go to restaurants without following somebody specifically, like an influencer or a guide. And I talk about different points. So one is explore the ethnic diversity of Spain. If you're in a region like the Canary Islands, there's a lot of Venezuelans there. So go to a Venezuelan restaurant. Or if you're in a region that's known for olives, go and do an olive oil tasting. I think the problem is so much of tourism is social media driven. I see a lot of influencers do, I don't know, they go to Seville for a weekend and somehow they're just experts and they tell you where to go and you're like, that doesn't make any sense. I think to me, the gems of Spain are the lesser known museums. I think you can learn a lot about Spanish food culture there. One example, the Carmen Thyssen Museum in Malaga. If you look in the area that's devoted to customs, you see so many of those customs are culinary customs. And I have never seen more examples of frying in art than there. So I think it's places like that. Go to the archaeology museum, seek out restaurants that have been around forever. The centenary restaurants, I think that's a key to understanding Spain, but not like people always go to Casa Botín in Madrid. But you think, expand out of Madrid, go to smaller places and seek that. And I also think another part of Spanish food culture that is really unknown is the sweets. I was in Granada and it's the time of Carnival. And I was just wondering, how could there be so many loaded cookie bakeries that have opened up in Granada? But at the same time, there's a trifle that's typical in Granada at Carnival. It's called cuajada de carnaval. And it's layered with different things like spaghetti, pumpkin. It has different types of layers like pastry, cream. And they use the leftover cookies from Christmas, mantecado. And it's presented in a beautiful ceramic dish, like traditional from Fajalauza, which is a very well-known factory in Granada that's been there for hundreds of years. And then it's decorated with a pomegranate, which is this Granada.
The name.
Yeah, nobody knows that dish. And so go to I think people always they never go to a Spanish pastry shop. They never visit the convents where nuns make sweets that have been made for hundreds of years. And I always reflect on how Italy, you go on Substack and you see so many people writing about Italian sweets. It's like a veritable avalanche of people writing about all these different sweets. But with Spain, there's this cultural heritage that people don't really know about. So I also tell people, go to a bakery, traditional one, and say, what's your most popular sweet? And have it there. Don't follow. I just don't understand going to Barcelona and having a matcha latte, a loaded cookie, and a bad paella.
And you've had Spanish food, right?
Yeah. It's like, So I think I try to steer people away into those different things, maybe do a cooking course. I think that's something that also it's been lost, but there's a lot of cooking places. There's one in Granada that does wonderful Moroccan and Spanish influenced cooking classes. So try to think outside the box. But I think that the problem is we've discussed this, the top 10 places to go that everybody goes to or that Anthony Bourdain went to. And that means that you have the queues there and then the other places are empty or only the locals go.
Yeah. What's your favorite Spanish dish?
I would say cocido. I'm a big legume fan. So cocido madrileño, which is made with chickpeas and black pudding, and it's served in 3 stages. So you have the soup, which some people serve with small noodles, the chickpeas, and then you have the meats. And I think that's a very kind of Baroque dish that people only really make, when they have guests, or you can have in fancy restaurants in Madrid. But I love a simplified version of that you can make in the pressure cooker. And I would make that maybe once a month. I really love that dish. Anything with legumes, I'm there.
Okay. All right. And do you have a favorite place in Spain where you like to go for food?
I think Madrid is, if I could only choose one place, I think it would have to be Madrid. Because Madrid is a place where you can have almost like a regional tour of Spain in regional places. So you can go to the Casa de Valencia and eat paella, rice dishes. You also have Castilla-La Mancha restaurants, Basque restaurants. You also have incredible South American food at all price points. Not South America, Latin America. And then you have very nice restaurants, but you also have Menú del Día. So I think Madrid has managed to get tourism, but they haven't lost themselves in the avalanche of tourists that they've received. I think Madrid is the city that has the highest average spend, and it shows in the quality of the places. But also you still have a lot of everyday places, like El Bar de Toda la Vida. You still have some of those in Madrid.
Okay. I've been to Madrid several times. I often have to fly out of the airport, and I have friends there, and I'll go out and have dinner with them. And so one friend took me to an Asturian restaurant. I hated it. We went to allegedly a Basque restaurant, and I don't know what was going on with that. We went to a Mexican restaurant that apparently used to be good, but is no longer good. And then I did go to an Ecuadorian restaurant, which was fantastic. I love Ecuador and the people and the food. So that was a positive experience. But I also couldn't get over how much Italian food was on offer. Pizzas, risottos, gelato. And it's just, this is Spain. Why are you selling Italian food?
I don't understand. I've seen that also happening in Granada with ice cream stores. So ice cream stores in Granada were only open during the summer. So there's a very famous Italian gelateria in Granada that's been there for decades. But now you have all these gelato chains that have opened in like really big spaces in Granada. I don't really understand what's driving that. It would be hard to stop it in a way. Like, how do you stop it? But I think the fact that's happening is also a reflection of Spain not selling their food culture well.
Yeah.
So it's like pizza. Like we have coca in Spain. Why are people buying pizza? But it has to do with that lack of narrative of Spanish food. And we've discussed this new plan that the Spanish government have come up with, El Plan de Gastronomía Nacional. And you think that this is the first time, 2026, that the Spanish authorities have developed a plan for the entirety of the country. And I think that tells you a lot. When you don't explain Spanish food, when Spanish food is always represented by chefs who have never cooked at home, like Ferran Adrià, he would be the first person to say he never cooks at home. And his cookbooks are proof that he never cooks at home. Then why are those the people that are telling the narrative of Spanish food? So,
but also Spanish food, I don't think is celebrated. Whenever I go to a restaurant, it's just the same classic things, the same touristy type foods, or even Iberia Airlines, which I think should be the flagship representative and ambassador to Spain. Once I was flying from London to Madrid, and it happened to be in first class because I had miles, and they served ravioli and tiramisu. And I thought, you have got to be kidding me. And I took a picture of it. And I thought, here I am on the Spanish national carrier in first class eating Italian food. What's wrong with this picture?
Yeah. And I think one thing about Italian food is it's a lot easier to make pasta than to make a rice dish. So I think a lot of the times people who open restaurants default to pasta because it's so cheap and it has a higher margin. Like when you look at a lot of the food that Spanish people like to eat, we love restaurants that are devoted to marisco, pescado. Those are very expensive restaurants. Or when you look at rice in Spain, the fact that paella is so well known, but it's very hard, in my opinion, to make paella. So not to make rice, so you can have versions of Spanish rice that are easier to make, but to make a paella, like a proper paella in a paella pan, it's very hard. So we've chosen very difficult dishes to promote Spanish food. And I think when you see the markets and people shopping for vegetables, you don't see that reflected in the menus.
That's true.
Yeah. What are all these people doing with all these vegetables? Why are they buying this? But then you go to a restaurant and you're like, what happened to all the vegetables?
Like the frying peppers,
Yeah.
the green peppers that people,
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
are fun. But a lot of, you see them in the store
Yeah.
and sometimes they see them in restaurants, but I don't think tourists know to ask for that.
Yeah, they don't know. They don't know because it's classically Spanish food went out to eat to have meat and fish. If you look, there's a documentary, I think from 1963 that shows you how much people went out for those type of products. Like Spanish people are not going to go and have like menestra de verduras, which is all this beautiful vegetable dish with all these different vegetables cooked separately. So they come together and they're all cooked perfectly. People would never pay for that. So I think that between the lack of teamwork and then the power of chefs, I think we're left with this confusing image. And then also we don't make those links in the intersections between different literature, art, archaeology. There are companies, there's a company in Seville that does archaeology and gastronomy. And they've created, they're the pioneers of this type of product where they go back and they develop beers or wines or vinegars linked to old recipes. And also do events. They're called Arqueogastronomía. And then Zaragoza just opened up a restaurant that also does food based on archaeology exploration. So I think things are changing. And I love Arqueogastronomía because it's not chef-led. It's actually people who come from an archaeology background. But the push is coming from people that are not chefs. And another example we discussed before, Molino y Cata in Granada. These are people who are olive oil experts who are presenting olive oil, and they're getting rid of all the myths around olive oil in a very coherent, affordable way. So I think that there are people who are pushing back against the power of chefs and the power of all these different regions. And of course, the most powerful regions are the ones that have the most money.
Yeah.
So like you say, Galicia is not the richest region, but imagine if they were, then we'd have a different view of Spanish food.
Yeah, you sure would. That's really interesting what you said about I call it paleo cuisinology, where you bring in ancient or old recipes and try and resurrect them. And you see so many Roman ruins around Spain, but even Calpe, not far from where I live, there's a Roman ruin where they used to make the fish sauce right there on the ocean. But it's in this terrible state of repair that there's no money has been put into making it an attraction or even putting up an information sign. You just see the old ruins there, the water's lapping at it and disintegrating over time, and that's it. And what a fascinating piece of culinary culture that is.
Yeah. But there's also, I don't know if there's a chef in Córdoba, Paco Morales. He has a restaurant called Nor, who interprets recipes. So his first menus were Spanish food before 1492. So before the introduction of tomatoes, potatoes. So I think there are people who are reinterpreting and creating all these different experiences, and they're very thoughtful and very academic in a way. And he's also rescuing like ceramics, and it's a beautiful experience. But I think the people who get the publicity are people like David Muñoz of Diverso. He sucks the air out of all the other chefs. But the food he does is using the global pantry.
Yeah.
And he's like the bad boy of Spanish food, but we give him too much attention. And I think this happens across the board. It happens in politics. It happens in any person who is slightly badly behaved or speaks their mind gets the attention. So we need to shift the attention. So I'm trying to shift the attention to the more less obvious connections that people can make about Spanish food, which are found really in museums that nobody goes to. And they're beautiful museums. But everyone wants to go to El Prado because that's the place to go. But they don't visit any other museums.
There's a museum in a town near me called Alfaz del Pi, east of Benidorm on the map. And there was an archaeology museum there. And I thought, oh, this is cool. I'm going to go. I couldn't figure out how to get in. I couldn't. First of all, there's no parking. There's no dedicated parking lot or anywhere designated to park. I was going to figure it out. But then I was driving around the block about 10 times. I could never figure out where the entrance was. So I just gave up. And anyway, life went on. But so back to what you were saying before about the certain chefs dominating things. I wonder why the visibility that we see in the Spanish gastronomy industry and restaurants seems to be, there's always some handsome man in the face of it. Where are all the women, the keepers of the recipes and the techniques and the cooking for centuries? It's always been the mothers and the grandmothers in the kitchens, usually. Where are they on the face of all these promotions?
I think they're there. And I think if you look at whether it's the Guia Repsol or the Michelin, there's a lot of women who have very successful restaurants. And also you have all the women, like there's what we call the guisanderas. It's like an association of women who promote like their local food. I think you can find them in different regions, especially Asturias has one. So the problem is these women exist. There's associations, Mujeres en Gastronomía, that promote Spanish women. But the problem is the promotion at the top continues, like whether it's Madrid Fusión or chef forums like that, they're all promoting the same chefs over and over again. It's almost like they've made an agreement to promote the same people. And I find it, I've been on these trips and I've always commented with Irish journalists. They always comment like, oh my goodness, where are the women? But the women are there. It's just they're not in those congress. They're not visible, but they're certainly there. There's women there's a woman that in Catalonia that specializes in flowers. There's women who specialize in olive oil in Alicante. There's a lot of very powerful women. But at that level, because also the chef forums are organized by the same company. So it's called Bocento. It's always like the people in that network. I think that happens also not only in Spain. I think you can see that in different countries, that there's people that are like approved. Yeah. But it's been for a long time the same chefs. Yeah.
There are some countries, you're right, that also are more male dominated in terms of the media, what is seen. But also I was just thinking, listening to you talk about Madrid Fusión and similar congresses, we're at the Ecuador booth because Cuenca was a culinary capital and they were doing some cooking demos and it was all male chefs. And Bolivia, same thing, all male chefs. I'm just thinking back and I don't recall seeing any women chefs at any of these. And I'm just thinking about the woman on the streets of Mexico making street food. Wait, they're not here.
Yeah, but I think there's also a reason for that. It's because women are in charge of childcare. They're in charge of so many things, so much unpaid labor. So when women work in the restaurant industry, it's very hard for them to have that time to be like, I'm going to go to Madrid Fusión. And also, this is something that I've discussed with a journalist here in Ireland, Ali Dunworth. She told me that women don't like to pitch. So she a lot of pitches from men. She does a lot of food events and she runs a lot of food festivals. But she was saying that men pitch much more and that she has to ask women. And I think that's the similar thing that happens in Spain. But there have been some complaints in Spain from Mujeres en Gastronomía, which is an association, saying we want to be more represented. So they've managed to get representation in Madrid Fusión at a more local level, but not on the big stage. The big stage, I will never forget, David Muñoz, which is Spain's most polarizing chef, did a presentation that was Me Anything. That was his presentation. So that tells you a lot about the state of Spanish food culture when people think that's interesting. Whereas you had people like Angel Leon presenting all these new discoveries because he's always investigating and finding new things. So you have one guy who's investigating and presenting new things, and the other guy, his presentation was Ask Me Anything. If I was the head of Madrid Fusión, or if I was a government agency involved in that, I would say, no, that person can't present that. It's just so crazy, but we create these people. We are at fault for following their antics. I think that's a problem when you didn't have chefs like that before. Chefs were very quiet and whatever, and they've managed to understand how social media works and how to get the attention.
How to get the attention. That's exactly
Yeah.
right. And it's interesting what you said about the woman. I was not aware of any of those resources, and I'm going to look up Mujeres en Gastronomía because I would like to be more informed of that. And perhaps it's just a matter of time. Times change. And I think as those voices become louder and as people like David Munoz move on, Ferran Adrià, they move on and do other things, then that opens up a gap. And water always rushes in to fill a gap. So maybe a prominent woman like the olive oil producer you were talking about, someone like that can step into the spotlight and diversify a little bit and really help change the narrative in Spain, I think, because there are so many fantastic agricultural products that people just don't know about. Are you familiar with the Museum of Canned Food outside Pamplona?
No.
So I was up in Pamplona, there was a tour, and we went to this Museum of Canned Food. And I'll have to say, you think, that sounds really uninteresting before you go. You think, canned food, that sounds dumb. And you get there, and honestly, it was amazing. It was so fantastic. They showcased all of the carrots and the potatoes and the peas and everything that they grew in the area. They showed you the canning process, how they cook them and then they can them and how they distribute them. And there were pictures of from old times, like 100 years ago when the factories were working and doing this stuff. And it was extremely well done. And I think for someone who doesn't really think about where canned vegetables come from, and here you have this resource. It was really extremely well done. They had a gift shop where I discovered a new wine I liked and all kinds of stuff. So thank goodness for little things like that. This then leads me to the idea of discoverability. So how does a food-loving traveler, and not someone who's just looking for the top 10 lists, right, or a Michelin restaurant, but someone who really wants to get deep into the food culture, how do they discover places like this Museum of Canned Food or the premium olive oil producer that you mentioned in Jaén? How do they find this information?
I think that we're getting to the heart of the problem. I think that most of the gastronomic journalism about Spain is in Spanish, and there's excellent writers and there's excellent books, but they're not translated. So when you look at who are the experts on Spanish food, they tend to be entrepreneurs like Andres, who have a lot of restaurants, or Jose Pizarro in London. But when you think about, I always ask people, what's your favorite Spanish cookbook? And they say, I don't know, Claudia Roden. I'm like, Claudia Roden didn't even live in Spain. And as much as I love her book, I know there's a lot more information. I think Spain needs to develop these type of information. They need to be more accessible for people. And I think because there's a lack of food writers about Spain in English, there's very little. And then the cookbooks are when you look at cookbooks, you think, oh my goodness, this is very basic. There's so many recipes that I could tell you that you have never seen, the same that as your teacher. So I think there's a lack of, where do I go if I'm somebody who cares about Spanish food culture and I want to learn? Where do I go? They don't know where to go. And then another problem that happens is that all the travel writing is you get invited on a press trip and they take you to the places of whatever. Sometimes it's like the people who have paid or their friends or whatever. So sometimes I read articles and I'm shocked at how they've missed the whole what that city was about. So yeah, I think there's definitely a space for promoting experiences, restaurants, sweets, things that you can't find that.
I remember once about 20 years ago, I was at World Travel Market in London, and there was the Madrid stand, and they were serving these little violet flavored candies. And I've never seen them since. And I remember asking them, and they said, yeah, it's from Madrid. And I've never heard about it, seen it again, but they were amazing. And what a lovely, delicate, and unusual flavor. You don't really find that very often. It's always chocolate or strawberry or something really usual, normal, common.
Yeah.
And how would a visitor know that Madrid is known for violet candies?
Yeah. Unless I think they are from Madrid. I think some of the tourism websites mention that, but that's another world, the world of Spanish confectionery. People don't know anything about it. The world of pastries, sweets, the world of food in festivals. I think when you go to Madrid, in San Isidro, which is the patron saint, you have foods that you eat that people wouldn't know about. It like, where is the cookbook in English that tells you about that? Where is the where are the there's a humongous gap. But people, I'm always surprised with a lot of restaurant critics or whatever, that they feel that they know Spain already, and I'm like, no, like, I don't feel. I've visited many regions. I've lived in the Basque Country. I've lived in Valencia, but I'm always surprised by different things that I didn't know about. I'm always surprised. Oh, there's a painter I didn't know about who paints this. There's a type of, I don't know, jug. Like, I was in Granada in the archaeology museum looking at the jugs that they used in Roman times for transporting like salted fish. And what shape they had. There's so much richness. But when you look at Italian food and how many people are in Italy Americans writing about Italian food, Italian Americans writing Italian.
Endless. There's no limits.
And with Spanish food, like, where's the blogger that writes in English about pastries? There isn't. So I think there is definitely, I'd love to see more of that. I'd love to see more writing that isn't chef driven. I just think, honestly, if you're a chef and you have 10 restaurants, you're an administrator. You hardly have time to go and do an in-depth exploration of the Museum of El Prado and their artwork. So so I think there's a lack of that. Information is not transferred to the people who need that. So there is a huge gap there, I feel.
You're absolutely right. And also, all of the different shows I've been to, whether it's Madrid Fusion, Fitur, World Travel Market, and I see a lot of brochures from Spain specifically, but also other countries. I think Mexico is probably the one exception, but all of the brochures I see, everything's in Spanish.
Yeah.
They don't bother translating it to at least English, which is the global language of travel and business. And Mexico, I think, does a good job because they're right next to the States and they get a lot of American travelers, so they know they have to. But, not everyone speaks Spanish.
Yeah. But remember, like, in Spain, speaking English is a really new thing. When I worked in consulting many years ago in Madrid, I was the only person in my company that spoke English. So now you have a lot of younger people who are well trained, but it's hard to be bilingual in Spain. Very in Latin America, it's almost like you go to any country, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, like, people learn English. Like, they watch TV in English. In Spain, we've watched dubbed TV. So I think it's the realization that this speaking a language is important is a relatively new thing. And also, I think Spain doesn't have the feedback mechanism that Italy has with American immigrants who went to America and promoted Italian food. Apart from the Basque shepherds who went to Idaho, we don't have
Nevada, yes.
We don't have that. Spanish food, unless, you've traveled to Spain, you don't really know it. There are reasons, but I think it's changed, at least in my opinion, in the last 20 years, there's been a gigantic transformation in the fact that younger generations speak very good English. They're well-trained. Then the packaging of Spain, there's been an explosion of good packaging. Whereas before, I would always say, this looks like I'm in a church. It was all like virgins and saints and very boring. And I think now you see a lot of packaged food that looks really good. And you see a lot of There's shops that sell saffron, for example, in Madrid, but they have beautiful products. They have lip balm, saffron, they have perfumes. So I think there are enterprising people. I just think that a lot of the times we don't see those people. I think, we don't see the shopkeepers, the people who are really innovating. We don't see the producers. We see these chefs who are, and I keep on going back to that, like in the 80s, there were a lot of women. There were a lot of women on TV doing cooking shows. And then all of a sudden they disappeared. There were a lot of women presenting at the Oxford Symposium. And then it was just about chefs. And you look at Carlos Arguiñano. I always talk about him. How long has he been on TV? Like 30 something years, 35 years. And now his son can these people retire? Can we get a woman in? Not the son, but please.
It's like the musicians that people like Madonna or Rolling Stones or Paul McCartney that just keep going. Please, you people are like, what's the guy, William Shatner, who keeps doing ads for Priceline? Please, William Shatner, retire. We enjoyed you in Star Trek, and that was 40 years ago, and it's time for you to go away.
Yeah. No, but it's fine. I like seeing chefs. I worked in the cooking school with Spain's first 3 Michelin-star chef. And he would do classes, and it was great to work with them. Fantastic. But the problem with Spanish TV is that we can't have a slot on TV for 35 years given to the same person. I know he's popular and we all love him, but I think that the TV company should be like, okay, now we need somebody new.
Time to move aside. And yeah.
And the reason why legacy media is struggling, because they don't have the mind to be like, no, we need someone younger. But I do see there's a lot of younger people doing interesting things, and they just don't get the airtime.
It's unfortunate, but I do think the future is with the younger people. There, like you said, there's entrepreneurs that are starting to do interesting things like the saffron lip balm, or starting to do artisanal beers and make a big deal of it, or better packaging for olive oil. I have started to see that a little bit recently, focusing on better packaging for honey. There's a great honey producer near us. And when we moved to the area, it was, your honey is really good, your packaging is really bad. And then last year they upgraded their packaging, and now it looks really premium and much better. And so I think it's just a matter of time. Maybe Spain needs a little bit more time. It's not as food forward as, say, like France is. It's a little bit behind the times, but it'll get there.
Yeah.
Hope so. Blanca, thank you for your time today. It's been such a pleasure, and I can't wait to meet you in person one day.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Erik, for having me.
That's it for this episode of the Taste of Place podcast. This episode is brought to you by the World Food Travel Association and its Taste of Place movement. We'd like to hear from you. We invite you to share your ideas, questions, and thoughts about the podcast by contacting us through our website, or you can connect with us and comment about the show on major social media platforms. Special thanks to our guest, Blanca Valencia, and our sincerest thanks to you for joining us. We wish you a safe, happy, and productive month ahead.